I'm Matti Friedman, author of Pumpkinflowers. The research process for Pumpkinflowers was a challenge to some extent because this subject matter, the pumpkin, this strange guerrilla war in South Lebanon in the 90s, is virgin territory. Almost nothing's been written about it. So one reason that there are no or very few books mentioned in the source notes is because almost no books have been published about that period. There is no history book about the period that I'm talking about. So when I tried to tell the story of this outpost and the war of which it was part, I had to build the entire thing myself. So I had to go and find the people who were there. And one person led me to another person, and that person led me to a third person who had a cell phone number of a guy who he remembered, and I kind of put together the picture that way, and I crisscrossed the country, pulling people out of their houses or out of their offices and making them talk to me about something that they hadn't thought about in most cases for many, many years. Press reports were also an important part of the research because, again, that was more or less the only thing that was written about this time. It was covered in the press at the time, although it was never written about afterward by historians. So I could find, by combing through newspapers, I could find tidbits of information about Outpost Pumpkin and about South Lebanon. And after quite a long time spent collecting these little pieces of information, I sat down and tried to put it all together in story form, and the result is Pumpkinflowers. The question of separating fact from fiction in the Middle East it's an important challenge for reporters here, as it is for reporters in many places these days. My advantage here is that this is a story that I experienced myself. I saw many of these events myself. I was here at the time. I spoke to people who had firsthand knowledge of the events that I'm talking about. So it's not like I'm sitting down with Google and trying to figure out, what's true and what's BS. I was here, and I have a good sense of what the story is, and I've been thinking about the story for almost 20 years. So I wasn't in the position of a reporter who had a few days to write a story and was trying to sift through source material with little ability to make heads or tails of it. I'm from here, I speak the language, and I have a pretty strong grasp of this particular story, not of all stories, but this particular one. So I'm confident that Pumpkinflowers is an accurate portrayal of that time. The responses that I've received since the book came out would seem to indicate that that's true. To the best of my knowledge, no significant information about the outpost or about that time has surfaced since the publication of the book, which means that I've covered all or almost all of my research bases. The question of how long it took to write Pumpkinflowers is a good one. I spent the last 4 years or so writing it, but the truth is I've been trying to write it since 2000 when I was discharged from the army. So that was 17 years ago. Not straight. There were breaks in the middle, but for about 17 years I've been grappling with this story and wondering if it's worth telling and wondering how to tell it. So the book that was finally published is actually the product of 17 years or so of thinking about these experiences. And I guess 20 years, it's been 20 years since I was drafted in 1997. So I guess you could say it's a solid 20 years of research and thought before the book was actually published. I'm working on a new book now, and it in some ways it is getting easier. I mean, the research is always a challenge. It's a challenge that I happen to love, but when you start out on a new project, and each project that I write seems to be about something completely different, so I have to learn something completely new and make a new array of contacts, and that's still as challenging as it ever was. But I'm more aware of my weaknesses as a writer, so now I know not to get hung up on the niceties of the first draft and not worry too much about how beautiful the first draft is, and just try to write something, put something on paper, and then kind of leave it alone and go back to it. So I'm more aware of the way my brain works, and I do think that makes it a bit easier. The next book that I'm writing, which is pretty far along at this point, is about some of Israel's first spies, and it's an exploration of double identity, because the spies who are the stars of this story are an interesting way of talking about the double identity that I think is a staple of human existence, and that's what makes it interesting to me. I'm Matti Friedman, author of Pumpkinflowers.